Hi everyone, thanks for joining us. This is a bright green webinar on good writing and making news and multimedia. We are a UK-based blog that talks about radical political ideas and how we can make the UK a bolder and more progressive country. And we wanted to share with you some of our best writers and media makers on Bright Green to share with you how they do what they do and how maybe you could take part in making some media that can make the world a better place. We're first going to hear from Violeta Vadja. I'll leave it to her to tell you about what her background is and what she's interested in talking about this evening, and we'll go straight over to her now. Violeta, the floor is yours.
Hi, so I am speaking from Hungary, which is in Central Europe. And I'm actually, just for starters, I need to tell you that I am actually Hungarian and Romanian, which is not unusual in this part of the world. And I work here on projects to do with advocacy for Roma communities. So actually my background is very much in participatory research and participatory action learning. I also do some academic writing, and I like to combine writing with activism. I think we all do, but for me, it's a very special combination that I think at the same time I like to do academic thinking and writing and activism of several kinds, actually. So do you want me to carry on, or do you want to introduce everybody first? Right. Okay. So in terms of what I write about, I really want to I want to use my writing in a particular way, which is to actually bring people's thoughts to life. So mostly I want to write for and with people who wouldn't normally get their voices heard, which in my case it means a lot of the time writing to redress and make it possible for people who are oppressed in a particular way, and particularly here in Central and Eastern Europe for Roma people, to get to talk about their own lives in a way that they want to talk about. And also generally I don't like to write by myself. I like to write in collectives. I like to write with other people. So it means that writing becomes something which is not an individual issue. So it's not writing as somebody who may have just something to say for themselves, but it's actually writing as part of a group that has something particular to say about a wider issue. And I think a lot of the time writing is all about first person opinions, like I know somebody that somebody else doesn't know. But I think we can use our writing in a way that is much more powerful, where we actually talk to each other about what we're going to write about. And so that my person becomes less important and the message that a group of people wants to bring forward becomes more important. And so that the writing becomes something which is not so isolated and isolating. So that's one of the points that I wanted to make, is that writing can be a collective exercise. And the other point I want to make is that actually what we can do through our writing is to make it possible for people who may just not even write ever, or people who don't have access to platforms which are in the English language, to have a much wider exposure to the world. So more recently, I've been using. I'm also a linguist, so I can speak quite a few languages. So I've been using the fact that it's very easy for me to translate people's thoughts from Eastern Central European languages into English, and giving people a platform to write and to express themselves who wouldn't normally get any access to English. So typically, sometimes also because of my work situation, I write not under my own name, but I often write or translate material that other people have written. And I have a very dear friend here in Hungary who runs a platform called Romnet, which is a blog for the Roma community. And he actually is an amazing investigative journalist. His name is Attila Balogh-Hidvégi, and if you want to look up his platform, his blog is romnet.hu, which stands for Hungary. We've done quite a lot of writing recently together, where essentially I've been translating his pieces, because I think that some of the stuff he writes about is so powerful and so important right now. The information that he can put out there about Central Europe is so important. But because he can't speak English, then his writing never gets to a wider audience. And so some of the things he's been writing about, just like these very few days, and one of his articles is gonna appear on Open Democracy in a few days' time, is he's writing about people who have been victimized by the Hungarian government because of being connected to the Central European University. And people may have heard that the Central European University is having a big problem surviving in this political environment. And more recently, people have been victimized and they've lost their jobs because of being connected to the university. So my friend is finding out all this information. People are coming to Romnet, talking to him about what's going on. And essentially all I do is I just translate what he writes into English and do a little bit of editing. And then we put it on English-speaking platforms. And it's very important. We do it under his name, not under my name. And I think that that kind of writing and that kind of just putting people's thoughts out there who wouldn't be doing it themselves, maybe because they don't have the confidence or they don't have the language, is something that will go a huge amount of way towards reversing some of the big, essentially the big oppressions that we have in our world today. So where people, I like to talk about people of the global majority, which means non-white people. So a lot of time, people of the global majority don't get the exposure that they could in the online world or in news portals. And a lot of the time, they have the most interesting things to say about the world that we live in, because they do a lot of grassroots activism. So I think one of our big roles as writers, and particularly progressive writers, could be to really go after the voices that don't get heard, and to be a conduit rather than being someone who then becomes famous for our own writing. So I find it quite comfortable to be in the role where sometimes people don't even know that I'm behind piece of news being published, just because that writing came from somebody else. And also in academic writing, we do a lot of that, where we write as collectives. We support each other, particularly as women and particularly as feminists. We support each other to make sure that the voices of those women get heard that wouldn't normally get heard. So that's really what's really the most important thing to me about writing and putting thoughts out there.
Great. Thanks, Violeta. That's brilliant. And just drawing some of the connections there about how we can use writing to break down structures. Depression. Here, Milja Komulainen, who's an international development professional based in Glasgow with a former background in student activism, and has contributed brilliant photography and video making to Bright Green. And she's going to talk about how you can use. I'm so sorry, we were going to go to Joe next, actually. So we will do that. We'll stick with our original order. So we'll hear from Milja in just a few minutes. But first, we're going to go to Joe Lowe, who's a campaigner at Campaign Against the Arms Trade and a professional journalist as well. And he's going to talk to us about editing news and writing news and what makes good reporting. Joe.
Hello, everyone. Sorry about that little delay. I'm Joe. I'm a journalist. I learned to do news writing at Kingston University. I'm just going to quickly repeat some of the advice I got there, and which has served me well since. So firstly, what is a good news story? What is a news story? You know, everyone kind of knows, but it's basically something that, you know, you tell a friend and they'd go, oh, wow, that's interesting. I want to know more. It doesn't have to be interesting to everybody. At Bright Green, you know, some would say we've got a bit of a niche, which is Green Party. You know, we do wider stuff, but stuff that involving the Green Party is definitely up our street. So, you know, you tell one of our readers something like Green Party membership overtakes UKIP, which is a story we've had in the past, and they'll think that's really interesting. I want to know more. Another example of a headline, say, climate change a myth, says Caroline Lucas. That's obviously never happened, but if, you know, if you did tell a Green Party member or one of our readers that, they would be shocked and want to know more. So how is news writing different to writing an essay at university or writing a comment piece? News writing is not opinion. Everything in it should be factual. That doesn't mean it can't include any opinions, but the opinions in the news story should not be that of the writer. So a factual statement would be, you know, Caroline Lucas said the moon is made out of cheese. You know, we're not saying that the moon is made out of cheese. We're saying Caroline Lucas said that. You know, if she did say that, that would be a factual statement. The other thing about news writing, stylistically, it differs, I think, or should differ from comment writing in the way that I think it should be one sentence per paragraph. That's what I've always been taught. At the very most, two sentences. I think it should use as simple as possible language, and you shouldn't assume that the reader has more knowledge than they do. So you kind of have to be, you have to assume that they don't know much, even if your readers are mostly quite educated. Some of them might not know something. So an example of that is, instead of saying under FPTP, the Green Party got 1 seat. Instead of saying that, you could say under first past the post, which is the electoral system currently used for UK-wide general elections, the Green Party got 1 seat. Just because not everyone will know what FPTP is. So you have to be quite patronising in some ways, but it's better than leaving people in the dark. One concept I want to quickly talk about is the inverted pyramid of news writing, which is a kind of theoretical idea. You know, you've got a pyramid like that, and you put the most interesting stuff at the top of the article. The least interesting is maybe not the right word, but the least newsworthy stuff in the middle, and then lesser and lesser. I guess the principle for that is, some people say that, you know, you lose 20% of your readers, or, you know, however many percent of your readers after every sentence. So you want to get the newsworthy stuff up at the top there. So an example of this is, you know, the first sentence should summarize what the whole story is about, and the second sentence should be similar to the first but give a little bit more detail. So on my way home today, I was reading London's Evening Standards, edited unfortunately by George Osborne, who's not a journalist, he's a politician and a bad one at that. But one thing so the headline of the story was, the first sentence of the story was, "A teenage cyclist was stabbed to death today by a masked gang." It's not the most cheery example, but it's the one I was reading on the way home. So a teenage cyclist was stabbed to death by a masked gang. So that encapsulates everything about the story. That is basically the story. But the second line says kind of the same thing, but it gives a bit more detail. So it says, in Battersea, a 17-year-old cyclist was ambushed and fatally stabbed as he tried to flee a gang in the early hours yesterday. So that is the same as the first sentence, but it's told you more information about where it happened. Instead of, no, it said it happens in Battersea, which is an area of London. It said what a 17-year-old cyclist, and we know a bit more about this cyclist, and we know about how he was attacked. He was ambushed and fatally stabbed. So, you know, that's how the first two lines should go. And then the third one could maybe be a quote, and then from then on you give the context to the story. So, for example, if it's a story about the Progressive Alliance, which is the idea of Labour, Lib Dems and the Greens, or possibly not the Lib Dems, it's a bit controversial, and the SNP and Plaid Cymru all working together to kick out the Tories. If it's a story about that, you know, you say what's happened, what the new thing is originally, and then in the later paragraphs, you should say what the Progressive Alliance is, whose idea it is, who supports it, who doesn't support it, when it's been used in the past, what happened then. And yeah, so that's basically how you order a news story. Most important stuff at the top, summarize the whole thing. First sentence, complete summary. Second, a bit more information. Third, maybe a quote if applicable, and then the rest of it given the context. Two other things, just if you're editing a news story or writing a news story, you have to be aware of legal matters, because everything that's published in the UK is subject to UK law, and UK law is quite restrictive on libel in particular, which is, you know, we have a lot of court cases over here. So libel, the basic rule about that is don't say anything bad about someone unless A, you can prove it's true, B, it's recognisably an opinion, or B, it's recognisably an opinion and references the facts on which this opinion is based. So an example of that would be, I think David Cameron is a bad prime minister. So I've said something bad about him, he's a bad prime minister. It needs to be recognisable as opinion. Thankfully that is. I'd give a few reasons why I think he's a bad prime minister. You know, he's you know, whatever, tax avoidance, I don't know. So yeah, the other way you can get away with libel is if the person has passed away, obviously. In terms of contempt of court, that is a big thing when you're writing about any kind of court case or criminality. So if someone's been arrested, there's a whole legal minefield there. So it's probably, if you're a beginner, best to seek advice before writing about anything like that. That's my basic advice. And yeah, that sums it up. Thank you for listening, and I urge you all to check out Bright Green and get involved, and I'll hand you over to Milja in a minute, or to Rick.
Thanks, John. Brilliant contribution. Helpful to have that very, very practical advice, which I think is often easy to pass over. How much kind of technical knowledge you really do need to put a news article together, because it is quite a technical process. But it can also be lots of fun going out there and telling stories which haven't been told before, and that's something that I think we do a reasonable job of at Bright Green, but always looking for more people to help out with. One person who's helped out with that is Milja Komulainen, who, as I said, is an international development professional based in Glasgow, and has contributed video and photography to Bright Green, as well as news stories. Milja, are you able to join us now?
Here we go. Hello, everyone. Yeah, so as Rick really generously said earlier, I'm not a professional journalist, but I come from a press officer and policy background. So I've kind of done the other side of journalism, sending press releases and liaising with journalists for the charity sector and also for the Scottish Greens at one point. Rick asked me to say a few things about interviewing and about making videos. Now interviews, I've got some experience from working just as a freelancer and writing for some Finnish media, and videos I've done for my sort of campaigning communications jobs, and also a couple for blogs and Bright Green, including those. So just to start off with interviewing, it's obviously quite a useful tool for anyone who's wanting to tell a story. Couple of notes here, just tips that I've learned from conducting interviews with politicians, elite interviews, but also interviews with kind of normal people at different rallies and demos and events. So first of all, when you're asking for an interview, especially if it's from some kind of high-level person, politician, academic, whoever, think about how you're going to pitch your story to them, because they're basically given their time for no fee, usually, hopefully, to you. So it needs to be somehow attractive to them. So you want to make your case from the get-go, otherwise you might not secure an interview. Prepare your questions carefully. So think through essentially what you want them to say. What information do you need? And also think about prompts. So, you'll have your kind of narrative and your big questions, but also try and think through what they might say and what you might need to say to get them to go a bit further. If you're interviewing in person, your interview might ask to see your questions beforehand. Try and keep the questions that you send to theme level. This is because you want the conversation to kind of flow naturally. You don't want your interviewer to be totally prepared for everything you're going to ask from them. But I think it is good practice usually to kind of give some indication of what kind of things you're going to ask. So I just talked about how important it is to prepare your questions carefully. In practice, though, often your conversation will kind of flow naturally and go to different places, and you won't stick to your scripts exactly. So don't be afraid of that. Just bear in mind that it's your responsibility to kind of get what you want from your interview. So being really prepared and kind of thinking through what might happen and what you want to know is really important. Now, after your interview might want to see your story before it's published. There's a bit of debate about whether that's something that you can demand from a journalist. My personal opinion is that it's good practice, and I've usually done that if my interview's asked for it. Having said that, if they want to change what's being said, or if they want to present themselves in like a better light than what you would afford to them, stick to your guns. As long as you're being true to what they've said, you don't need to change. You don't need to change what your quotes are, what you've referenced in your story. Really useful little tip, always bring a recorder or your phone where you can get the whole conversation in a voice memo, just because taking enough notes when you're having that conversation can be really difficult unless you're very good and very professional. You do have to ask for permission to record, and you have to let your interviewer know that that you're recording. When you're coming to write your story, you'll need to edit your quotes. And that's totally normal, completely okay, but you have to be really mindful that you're not altering the original meaning of what your interviewee has said. So be really careful when you're doing your edits. Think through, is this really what they said, or have I changed the meaning or the tone, or changed the context too much? Oh yeah, best interview tip that I ever had was from a former teacher who was actually an academic. And she said, always have a notepad with you, even if you're not taking notes to actually use for the story, you're just recording on your recorder. When you've asked a question, you let your interviewee answer the question. Take a few minutes just to take notes. Just say, sorry, just can you give me a minute? Take your notes, leave a bit of silence there, because often you get like the juiciest, most interesting things from the person you're talking to at that moment, when there's a bit of kind of empty space. And at the end, I think it's useful always to say to your interview, have you got anything to add that we didn't discuss, anything that you'd like to bring to my attention, because often you get useful things then as well. that's interviews in person. Joe will be totally familiar with this because he's a news journalist. For news reporting, it's quite common for journalists to just contact a person and ask for a written quote. So that's kind of for those pieces that you need to do really quickly. You don't need quite as much meat. You just want like some comment from an organization or from a politician. So that is also totally fine. Moving on to video. So I've done videos mostly as a press officer, like I said. So I've done kind of campaign communications for a couple of NGOs and for the Green MSPs briefly. And it's really quite amazing how useful audiovisual content can be in engaging people in the online kind of news and communication space. So it's something that I'm really wanting to get better at and use more because, yeah, I just think it's kind of the future of online comms. And, you know, as Bright Green, that's what we do is engage our audience online. I'll just talk you through 3 stages and kind of some lessons that I've learned on the way. So that's prep for your video, gathering the material for your video, and editing. Just very briefly, very quick. And this is, you know, kind of an evolving art. So some of you might have a better idea how to do it and tips that you can contribute as well. So just first of all, prep. As with any story, think about what you want to say. Think about the narrative for your video. It's a little bit different from, like, I guess, like an exploratory journalistic piece. Generally, the videos that you do for online need to be quite concise and quite short. So you want to have a really clear narrative throughout the whole thing. And what's your angle? What's interesting? Joe mentioned Bright Green usually report from the green angle. So that's probably something that we can contribute. Yeah, think about how you can make your message or the topic really clear to the person who's watching. And related to that, think about what materials you need. So you can do little interviews, have people actually talking on your video, but you can actually also just compile it from kind of slides that have text on them. And, you know, also use pictures, graphics, whatever you find, tweets, you know, just pick them off the internet. And yeah, you might not actually need any original content at all. Well, apart from your text on your slides. Yeah, if you're interviewing people for your video, think through your questions really carefully and think through how you'll kind of prompt those questions in the video. So will you add a slide before you add the footage saying like, what do you think about, I don't know, the general election? And then you have your video footage after. Yeah, I think a general rule, be wary of not being too simplistic when you're doing these short videos for online. Obviously, you kind of need to be quite direct and you can only use very few words yourself, but you don't want to kind of get into that clickbait sort of mentality. So try and be really true to your subject and think through the balance of being concise and interesting, but also being honest. Now for the kind of filming part, if you are doing interviews for your video, I just use my smartphone for them. Other people probably have nice fancy cameras, and that's great. I don't have like a portable mic, but I think if you can get one, that would be a really smart investment because sound quality when you're filming outside especially can be a bit of an issue. You'll need like a nice handy app to edit your movie or your interview and your whole video really. I've used iMovies, which is really good for the iPhone, or KineMaster for Android. Both of those are really good. For KineMaster, you need to pay a couple of pounds to get rid of the watermark on it, but I think it's worth it. Always film horizontally. It just fits nicer if you share your video on social media. And you know, the key is if you do film the other way, film all your material in the same, either horizontally or vertically, just so they match the same frame better. again, with interviewing, if you're going to an event, for example, or like a rally or demo or whatever, if you're interviewing someone, make it clear what's your story for, roughly what the angle is, so they're aware of where their words are going to be used in, and just be really sure that they understand that they're being filmed and they're being recorded, and that interview will be shared. This kind of goes for the previous chat on interviews in general. It's always good practice to refer to people's names. I don't always have time to do this, but if you can, you should. Unless obviously there's a reason to protect a person's anonymity. Sorry, I'm foreign, so it's a hard word to say. Yeah. If you're interviewing outside an event, I already kind of mentioned sound quality can be a bit tricky. So try and get close to your interviewee, but obviously not too close to be rude or creepy. If it's windy, it can be handy to try and shield the mic on your device with your hand. Not too much to block out the sound, but just to kind of keep the worst of the wind away. We're in Scotland, so it can be really tricky. When you're starting your interview, think about composition. So what's in the background, kind of good practices to think about your frame as like cutting off kind of the chest level and getting your person's face, quite prominently in the shot. Yeah, if you're filming inside and if you've got time to actually arrange the interview situation, try and get a light source from kind of one side of the face, and that makes the face kind of pop out and more prominent. There's just some kind of studies or something to show that that makes a more attractive image for the viewer. Yeah, be clear with your interviewee, tell them where to look. Are they looking at you? If your phone is like here, should they look you in the eye, or should they look at the camera, just so their eyes aren't kind of wandering and they feel comfortable? And kind of tell them, you don't need to say your whole thing perfectly. You can make mistakes. If you say something that you didn't mean, or you want to reword things, just take a wee break and then continue. That just gives you like a bit of space when you're editing at the end. And very, very crucial, and I still haven't mastered this myself, don't or ah when people are saying an interesting thing. Don't go, that's a good point, because that's obviously recorded in your footage and then you can't use it. And after they're finished talking, leave a bit of time before you ask the next question, again, so that you can edit like a really nice clean clip out of that. For editing, finally, I'll finish really quickly. Keep it really short. I think 2 to 3 minutes is ideal for social media, just for engaging. If you want to go for longer, I think there's some research showing that between 6 to 12 minutes, there's not much drop in engagement. So you're kind of safe to go for that if it's for the website or something. And if it's like a more obviously an issue that commands a bit more time, that's fine. But 2 to 3 minutes for short, or for longer, 6 to 12. Always get more material than you need. Because you want to edit that nice narrative, and if you're getting interviews, people will sometimes say like not such concise or interesting things. You want to have a bit more, and then you can kind of make it tight and interesting, but you want some material to work with. As with kind of what I mentioned earlier with interviewing in general, be careful not to skew what your interviewee has said when you're editing things down and like adding slides in between. Just watch it one more time finally to think, will this portray what this person has said in the light that they meant to say it? Just be careful about that. So think about pace. So you want to keep it really short, but you also don't want to rush through things so that your viewer doesn't have time to take everything in. So, can you put in like slides in the middle to like set a more interesting pace? Can you put in transitions that give your viewer like a really tiny break before the next interview starts or the next clip comes in? If you have time, always add subtitles, because often people will watch things without audio, so that'll make your video useful to them even if you don't have audio. Yeah, if you use other people's photos or captures from tweets or anything like that, I think it's sensible to add copyright info and like your sources at the end, like just add a slide at the end for that. yeah, when you're editing again, even if you've had a really great quote from one of your interviewers or something, try and, you know, if it's long, try and break it up and like maybe move things around a bit so that your viewers got a nice change in what's being said, or, you know, it's just an more interesting kind of full picture. And if you use kind of slides with sentences on them, or like if you put your questions in slides, keep sentences really short and make sure that your viewer has time to read them before you move on to the next thing. And I think for your kind of starting screen, pick something interesting and attractive, either like a bold, I don't know, title, or a person's face usually works really well, from my experience. That's really it. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Milja. That's brilliant, and it's really useful to hear about making video, because I think that's something that a lot of people might consider to be quite daunting, but actually it's not too tricky, and it's also lots of fun. So I'd really recommend getting out there and having a go at making little video clips of yourselves. And everyone's got a smartphone in their pocket nowadays, which means you've got a whole kind of video editing suite and a movie camera all in your pocket, which is actually a really amazing resource, and we should try and get to grips with using that, because that's going to be more and more important in the future. We've heard from all three of our speakers tonight, and had some really good contributions about how to make media and why. And what I just wanted to reflect on was maybe one example of one of your favorite things that you've contributed either to Bright Green or another publication, how you made it and why, and just something that you thought was kind of inspirational and fun as an example of one of the best things that you've made. So Joe, if it's all right, we'll go to you first.
Yeah, sure. I think the favourite thing I've written for Bright Green is a profile of Sian Berry when she was in the internal election process to become the Greens candidate for London Mayor. I just basically emailed her or tweeted her or something, and then rang her up, spent 40 minutes on the phone with her, and wrote up a kind of profile. And I thought it was good because I think it helped inform our readers and helped with the election process. Because sometimes with Green elections, you get a list of 6 people, maybe heard of 1 or 2 of them. You don't really know much about any of them. So I think it's good that we are informed as possible to make it a fair election. And I really enjoyed that one. Other things I've liked doing, I've liked reporting on green hustings, young green hustings, where you watch the live stream of the hustings and then report it up for people who weren't there at the time or haven't had time to sit through an hour's video. And I think again that helps with the election process. And just finally, I wrote something called "When Will Journalists Understand the Greens?", which was an analysis of where political reporters who'd gone to a Green Party conference and then written stories for their mainstream publications hadn't really understand the way Green Party conferences and policy differs from the other parties and the mistakes they'd made in that. So those were my favourite things, but there's plenty of great stuff from Bright Green. I urge everyone to have a look.
Brilliant, thanks, Joe. And if people do want to have a look at examples of things that are created, our website's bright-green.org, and you can find some of the videos that Milja and others have made on our Facebook page as well, which is facebook.com/bright.grn. We'll go to Violeta next. And Violeta, you've written for lots of publications, including the Green European Journal and Open Democracy. Is there one thing that kind of sticks in your mind as being a really nice example of a bit of content that you've contributed?
Well, actually, it was one piece that, or a series of articles that I started for Bright Green, and I really liked that. Well, partly because it was very prescient of some of the work that I'm doing now. So some of the work that I'm doing now is bringing people together who are of different faiths, but are also social activists. to get them to work together and try to build a much wider coalition of people who can do world changing, really. So right now I'm working with Catholic, Jewish, Roma, Muslim organizations, and also just ordinary civil society organizations in Central and Eastern Europe. And it's pretty amazing the understanding that I'm getting, but from these organizations and these people about the role of faith in activism and in changing the world is quite profound. But about 2 years back, I think, when I was still one of the co-editors of Bright Green, I had this idea of starting a series of how does faith inform our activism? Because I had a hunch that there are quite a lot of us activists who do activism because of their faith. Now, I don't do activism because of a particular faith. I'm not a religious person myself, but I think I have a very deep belief in some values and principles, which are quite different from other people's. But I do know from my family and from people that I know quite closely that there are people who are moved to do activism and to really be politically active because of their faith. And just sort of starting out, I realized that Jonathan Bartley, who is of course now the leader of the Green Party, has a very strong background in Catholicism, and that there were quite a lot of activists within the Green Party who are Jewish, and nobody ever knows. So sometimes people are very good activists, but nobody knows that they're actually also driven by a very deep belief in a system of values and in a faith. And because there's always this massive attack on people because of being Muslims, and there's this thing about how if you're Muslim, you have to be like this or you have to be like that. What we did at that point for Bright Green is I brought together a group of people who had this background, and we wrote collectively an article together. And then it was at the time when Pope Francis was starting to be very vocal, and he was starting to speak up for the environment, and I thought that was very, very exciting. And of course, since then, he's been quite a leading light in the Catholic Church, really transforming a lot of the paradigms that we associate with the Catholic Church. And one of the very nice things that, because that became a series of, can people write on Bright Green from the background of their faith? One of the very loveliest pieces came from Church of England priest, who was also a green activist, who talked about why it was so important that we took faith into account when we were doing politics. It's quite a deep piece, and maybe it's not the news items and it's not the short videos that other people were talking about, but I do think we also need these articles that make us reflect very deeply on where we're coming from and where we're going and why we're doing things. And I'm kind of pleased with the Catholic connection, that the Green Party has a leader now who has that faith background, because I think we very often diminish the role of faith in our lives. And just the very last thing I'll say is that through my work now, I'm very involved with a Hungarian blogger, and I think I might actually do that thing that I was talking about, where I will maybe ask her if she would like some of her pieces translated and published in an English speaking medium, maybe on Bright Green or somewhere else, because what she is doing is pretty amazing. She's a theologian. She's in charge of an organization of women theologians, feminist theologians, and they are Jewish, they are evangelical, they are Christian, and all together they are really trying to change the way the church looks at women. And she's very proudly identifies as a liberation theologist. And there's quite a lot of mileage in coming back from our silos, where we think that you have to be an atheist, or you have to be like this, or you have to be like that to change the world. But I think that sometimes you can go quite deep to bring people together in a much wider coalition, and I think that that's how we're going to make those changes that we want to see.
Thanks, Violeta, and I mean, it's a really useful reminder to provoke us about the contribution that we can make in long form discursive kinds of journalism, as well as a shorter, more pithy comment and reporting as well. So thanks for that. We'll wrap up then with hearing from Milja about an example of the piece you've made. So yeah, Milja, take it away. Oh, I'm sorry, we can't hear you. Just 1 second. Okay, Milja, I think your microphone is muted at your end, so you'll need to click that yourself.
Is that working?
That's perfect, thank you.
Good, sorry. Yeah, I don't know if it's my best piece, but it's maybe the one that I enjoyed making the most. So I always think that writing or making videos or journalism in general is like the best thing in the world, because if you're lucky, you get paid basically just to learn about something really interesting and then just chat about it through whatever media you're using. And I was doing a video for Bright Green on this anti-racism march in Glasgow just I think about a month ago, and just chatted with people there about whether they think there's a racism problem in Scotland and what we should all do about it. And it was very simple, quite basic, but just super interesting just to talk to the folk who were there and yeah, make something hopefully in some way interesting to other people, for other people to see. So yeah, I would say that was the one that I enjoyed the most myself.
And how did you? I'm sorry to keep you on the line, but how did you actually go about making that? Because did you just go out to people and ask them? And if so, what kind of response did you get?
Yeah, no, super. People are really brave. So if you just explain who you are, say your name, explain what you're doing and who for, most people will say yes to being filmed. So yeah, you just go up to them, have a chat. Yeah, and it's almost like a brilliant excuse just to meet people and talk to them about their views. And yeah, so it's almost like a selfish incentive to do that kind of thing. It's just really interesting. So no, I would just encourage anyone, if you go to a demo or go to an event, just take your phone and just give it a go. Because I think I've been refused like once over the last couple of months when I've been doing these things. So people are really open, really receptive.
Brilliant. Well, thanks to Milja as well as Violeta and Joe for joining us. We'll make sure we post the links to all of those pieces that they're referring to, and also any relevant software that was mentioned in the comments under the YouTube video, so that you can read those in your own time. I should say as well that my name is Rick Lander, and I'm one of the 3 co-editors of Bright Green, and it's an entirely volunteer-run blog where we take contributions from a big, diverse range of writers, one of which could be you. So if you want to get in touch with us with your ideas, if you want some advice or support, or if you've got a pitch for an article that you want to share with us, then do get in touch. You can email us at front-desk@bright-green.org, or alternatively drop us a tweet, and you can do that via @brightgrn on Twitter. So I think that's all to say from us, but thanks very much for keeping with us and watching, and we hope to see you on Bright Green. Bye.